Hi! Hello, everyone. I'm super excited to be here with you. Just adjusting the light a little bit. Oh, wrong one. And yeah, I'm very excited to be here. Okay, so tonight we are reading Isabel Allende, House of the Spirits. Another beautiful, awesome, whoops, there's a lot of light on that. Excellent book to be read. This is what she used to look like when she wrote this book. And now she's still writing, and she's actually giving writing courses and things like that. So another lovely from the library. Before we get started, let's light some sage. Here we go. So we can make sure that we release. Close this a little. We can release any and all energies from the course of the day. It's been a long day. So that we can really rest, relax, feel safe in the comfort of our home. Hopefully you're tucked in and you're releasing any kind of stress from the day, any anxiety, anything that is not in your highest and best, right? We're just letting it all go. All right, let's get started. Clarity, creation energy. Let's release any and all energies that are not serving your highest and best. Let's release and transform and transmute this energy that may be in, on, and around us that we picked up throughout the course of our day, and we release it with love and light, sending it down to the crystalline core of the earth where it is transformed and transmuted. Yes, that is my wish for you, so that we release everything and you close your eyes and you have this beautiful, incredible sleep tonight. Yes. Okay, let's get started. Our reading. Here we go. How much does a man live after all? Does he live 1,000 days or one only? For a week or for several centuries? How long does a man spend dying? What does it mean to say forever? Beautiful little poem from Pablo Neruda, another giant, literary giant. House of the Spirits. Chapter 1. Beruas came to us by sea. The child, Clara wrote in her delicate calligraphy. She was already in the habit of writing down important names, matters, and afterward, when she was mute, she also recorded trivialities, never suspecting that 50 years later, I would use her notebooks to reclaim the past and overcome lessons of my own. Barabbas arrived on Holy Thursday. He was in a despicable cage, caked with his own excrement and urine, and had the look of a hapless, utterly defenseless prisoner. Let's get this up here a little bit more. Hold on 1 second. Yes. Okay. Sorry. time. We always have to get comfortable, don't we? Okay. Where was I? But the regal carriage of his head and the size of his frame bespoke the legendary giant he would become. It was a bland autumn day that gave no young hue of the events that the child would record, which took place during the down mass in the parish of San Sebastian, with her whole family in attendance. As a sign of mourning, the statues of the saints were shrouded in purple robes, that the pious ladies of the congregation unpacked and dusted off once a year from a cupboard in the sacristy. Beneath these funeral sheets, the celestial retinue resembled nothing so much as a room full of furniture awaiting movers, an impression that the candles, the incense, and the soft moans of the organ were powerless to counteract. Terrifying dark handles loomed under the life-size saints, had stood each with its influenza, pale expression, an elaborate wig woven from the hair of someone long dead, its rubies, pearls, and emeralds of pointed glass, and the red crown of a Florentine aristocrat, the only one whose appearance was enhanced by mourning, was the church's patron saint, Sebastian. For during Holy Week, the faithful were spared the sign of the body, twisted in the most indecent posture, pierced by arrows, and dripping with blood and tears like a suffering homosexual whose wounds, kept miraculously fresh by Father Restrepo's brush, made Clara tremble with disgust. Moving right along. It was a long week of penitence and fasting, during which there were no card games and no music that might lead to lust or abandon, and within the limits of possibility. The strictest sadness and chastity were observed, even though it was precisely at this time that the forked tail of the devil pricked most insistently at Catholic flesh. The fast consumed of soft puffed pastries, delicious vegetarian dishes, spongy tortillas, and enormous cheeses from the countryside, with which each family commemorated the Passion of the Lord, taking dogs from the collection box," he shouted from the pulpit, as he pointed to a gentleman who was busying himself with the box on his lapel so as not to show his face. "And there's the shameless hussy who prostitutes herself down by the docks," he accused Doña Esther Trueba, disabled by arthritis and a devotee of the Virgin del Carmen, who opened her eyes wide, not knowing the meaning of the word or where the docks were. "Repent, sinners, foul carrion, unworthy of our Lord's great sacrifice. Fast, do penance." Carried away by vocational zeal, the priest had all he could do to avoid openly disobeying the instructions of his ecclesiastical superiors. While who, shaken by the winds of modernism, were opposed to hair, shirts, and flagellation, he himself was a firm believer in the value of a good thrashing to vanquish the weakness of the soul, and was famous for his unrestrained oratory. The faithful followed him from parish to parish, sweating as he described the torments of the damned in hell, the bodies ripped apart by various ingenious torture apparatuses, the eternal flames, the hooks that pierced the male member, the disgusting reptiles that crept up female orifices, and the myriad other sufferings that he wove into his sermons to strike the fear of God into the hearts of his parishioners. Excuse me. Even Satan was described in his most perversions in the Galatian accents of the priest, whose mission in the world was to rouse the conscience of its indolent Creole flock. Severo del Valle was an atheist and Mason, but he had political ambitions and could not allow himself the luxury of missing the most heavily attended Mass on Sundays and feast days when everyone would have a chance to see him. His wife, Nivea, preferred to deal with God without that heretic benefit of intermediaries. She had a deep distrust of Cossacks and was bored by descriptions of heaven, purgatory, and hell. But she shared her husband's parliamentary ambitions, hoping that if he win a seat in Congress, she would finally secure the vote for women, for which she had fought for the past 10 years, permitting none of her numerous pregnancies to get in her way. On the Holy Thursday, Father Restrepo had led his audience on the limits of their endurance with his apocalyptic visions, and Nydia was beginning to feel dizzy. She wondered if she was pregnant again, despite cleansings with vinegar and spongings as she was settling into maturity, because her daughter Clara, the youngest of her children, was now 10. It seemed that the force of her astonishing fertility had finally began to ebb. She was able to attribute her present discomfort to Father Restrepo when he pointed at her to illustrate a point about the Pharisees who had tried to legalize bastards and civil marriage, thereby dismembering the family, the fatherland, private property, and the church, and putting women on an equal footing with men. This in open defiance of the law of God, which was most explicit on the issue, along with their children, Nivea and Severo, took up the entire third row of benches. Clara was seen beside her mother, who squeezed her hand impatiently, whenever the priest lingered too long on the sins of the flesh, for she knew that this would only lead the child to visualize with even greater accuracy aberrations that transcended reality. Clara was extremely precocious and had inherited the runaway imagination of all the women in her family on her mother's side. This was evident from the questions she asked, to which no one knew the answers. The temperature inside the church had risen, and the penetrating odor of the candles, the incense, and the tightly packed crowd all contributed to Nivea's fatigue. She wished this ceremony would end at once so she could return to her cool house, sit down among the ferns, and taste the pitcher of barley water flavored with almonds that Nivea always made on holidays. She looked around at her children. The younger ones were tired and rigid in their Sunday best, and the older ones were beginning to squirm. Her gaze rested on Rosa, the oldest of her living daughters, and as always, she was surprised. The girl's strange beauty had a disturbing quality that even she could not help noticing, for this child of hers seemed to have been made of a different maternal material from the rest of the human race. Even before she was born, Nivea had known she was not of this world, because she had already seen her in dreams. This was why she had not been surprised when the midwife screamed as the child emerged. At birth, Rosa was white and smooth, without a wrinkle, like a porcelain doll, with green hair and yellow eyes, the most beautiful creature to be born on earth since the days of original sin. As the midwife put it, unmasking, making the sign of the cross from her very first bath. Nana had washed her hair with chamomile, which softened its color, giving it the hue of old bronze, and put her out in the sun with nothing on to strengthen her skin, which was translucent in the most delicate parts of her chest and armpits, where the veins and secret texture of the muscles could be seen. Nana's gypsy tricks did not suffice, however, and rumors quickly spread that Nivea had born an angel. Nivea hoped that the successive and unpleasant stages of growth would bring her daughter a few imperfections, but nothing of the sort occurred. On the contrary, at 18, Rosa was still slender and remained unblemished. Her maritime grace had, if anything, increased. The tone of her skin was soft, bluish lights, and of her hair, as well as her slow movements and silent character, all made one thing. I lost my place. All made one think of sun, inhabitant of the sea. There was something of the fish to her. If she had had a scaly tail, she would have been a mermaid. But her two legs placed her squarely on the tenuous line between a human being and a creature of myths. Despite everything, the young woman had led a nearly normal life. She had a fiancé and would one day marry, on which occasion the responsibility of her beauty would become her husband's. Rosa bowed her head, and a ray of sunlight pierced the Gothic stained glass windows of the church, outlining her face in a halo of lights. A few people turned to look at her and whispered among themselves. As often happened as she passed, but Rosa seemed oblivious. She was immune to vanity, and the day she was more absent than usual, dreaming of new beasts to embroider on her tablecloth, creatures that were half bird and half mammal, covered with iridescent feathers and endowed with horns and hooves, and so fat, and with such stubby wings that they defied the wiles of biology and aerodynamics. She rarely thought about her fiancé, Esteban Trueba, not because she did not love him, but because of her forgetful nature, and because 2 years' absence is a long time. He was working in the mines in the north. He wrote to her regularly, and Rosa sometimes replied, sending him lines of poetry and drawings of flowers. parchment paper through the correspondence which Nivea violated with impunity at regular intervals. She learned about the hazards of a miner's life, always dreading avalanches, pursuing elusive veins, asking for credit against good luck that was still to come, and trusting that someday he would strike a marvelous seam of gold that would allow him to become a rich man overnight and return to lead Rosa by the arm to the altar, thus becoming the happiest man in the universe. As he always wrote at the end of his letters, Rosa, however, was in no rush to marry, and had all of her forgotten the only kiss that they had exchanged when they said goodbye, nor could she recall the color of her tenacious suitor's eyes because of the romantic novels that were her only reading matter. She liked to picture him in dark-soled boots, his skin tanned from the desert winds, clawing the earth in search of pirates' treasure, Spanish doubloons, and Incan jewels. It was useless for Nydia to attempt to convince her that the wealth of mines lay in rocks, because to Rosa it was inconceivable that Esteban Treba would spend years piling up boulders in the hope that by subjecting them to God only knew what wicked incinerating processors that would eventually spit out a gram of gold. Meanwhile, she awaited him without boredom, unperturbed by the enormous task she had taken upon herself to embroider the largest tablecloth in the world. She had begun with dogs, cats, and butterflies, but soon her imagination had taken over and her needle had given birth to a whole paradise filled with impossible creatures that took shape beneath her father's worried eyes. Severo felt that it was time for his daughter to shake off her lethargy, stand firmly in reality, and learn the domestic skills that would prepare her for marriage. But Nydia thought differently. She preferred not to torment her daughter with earthly demands, for she had a premonition that her daughter was a heavenly being, and that she was not destined to last very long in the vulgar traffic of this world. For this reason, she let her alone with her embroidery threads and said nothing about Rosa's nightmarish zoology.